My name is David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. And so just by way of background, we were founded. I'm going to hand it over to our founder in just a second, who's going to give a more in-depth spiel about who we are and where we came from. But we started 6 years ago, and mostly as just a place for gay, bi, and trans men to find resources, see other families that look like theirs. And over the course of the 6 years, we've had a lot of people reach out to us on our very popular Instagram page, which is maybe where you know us from, or on our website, on Facebook, asking for specific resources and examples of how they can become a dad via the main ways that are available to queer men. And to be honest, we just really haven't had the capacity or the experts to help with that up until now. So we are relaunching Gays with Kids currently. If you go to our website, it's brand new, which is www.gayswithkids.com. We are rolling out new resources daily. And most excitingly, we're partnering with leading experts in the fields of surrogacy and IVF, within adoption, within foster care, within co-parenting. So all of the ways that queer men are able to become fathers, which I don't need to tell any of you all, since you're here on a webinar to figure out how to do it. None of them are easy. There's complications involved with all of them. And so we are here to try to make this as easy and seamless as possible, and to provide you with the leading experts in the field that can answer your questions and kind of help guide you on the way. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to just go a little bit deeper into who Gays with Kids is, and then I'll kind of go over the format of the webinar, and then we'll just jump right in so we can save enough time for Q&A at the end. Brian, if you want to take it.
Sure, thanks, David. And welcome, everybody. As David said, I'm Brian Rosenberg. I'm the founder of Gays with Kids. You can go visit our website and learn all that you need to know about us. I'm excited to welcome you today for our very first Choosing Your Path to Fatherhood webinar. You don't know this, but today's webinar marks an important milestone for Gays with Kids, and David started to allude to this. It's our first of our all-new weekly webinar series in which we're enlisting expertise from the best of the best in LGBTQ plus family building. Folks like today's panelists, and I'm going to let David introduce them more formally. But why? To help you choose which path to fatherhood is best for you, and then to guide you along each step of your entire journey, whichever path you choose. You know, those of us who are already dads can look back typically at an event or some other turning point where we became serious about fatherhood, where we got our own start to realizing the dreams of building a family we could call our own. For me, it was the hour-long drive to New Jersey some dozen years ago that I took with my now husband to attend an adoption conference. I hope someday each of you on this webinar will look back and find that it was an important part of your first step. Even more important, I hope one day you'll share your own family building story on Gays with Kids so you can help inspire future queer dads. Once again, thank you for joining us. Welcome. And without further ado, let me hand things back over to you, David.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Brian. So like Brian mentioned, this is the first in what will be a weekly series of webinars that are going to go into depth on every different aspect of queer family building that you can think of. This one is really meant to be an overview. So we're going to be going over the processes of becoming a dad via surrogacy, via adoption, foster care, and what we're calling co-parenting. These are all very complicated processes that deserve their own webinar series, which is what we're rolling out from here on out. So this is intended to be a high-level overview. Okay, so with that, let us jump in quickly to a very quick introduction to our panelists. I'm going to let them do a more in-depth introduction. But so with us today, we have Trey Rabin, who's the Associate Director of Kinship and Community Services at Amara, which is based in Seattle. And then we have Vicky Ferrara, who's the founder and legal director of Worldwide Surrogacy. And she is based in Fairfield, Connecticut, but as her name alludes to, works worldwide. And then I am David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. So what we're going to be following today, what we're going to be covering are the 4 main paths that are available to queer men to become fathers. The main considerations that you have to keep in mind for each. What are some advantages and challenges to thinking through whether these are going to be appropriate paths to parenthood for you? And then we're going to leave you with some next steps, which again will probably be covered in a future webinar. But we do want to, we're going to be cognizant of the fact that we're throwing up some very big topics here, and we're going to be scratching the surface today. But we have, again, many more webinars and other resources that we're going to be rolling out that will hopefully get to your very specific questions. So I've just covered, these are the 4 paths that we're going to be covering today. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vicki, who's going to jump into surrogacy for us.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Brian. It's nice to be with you, Trey. I'm Vicki Ferrara. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. I'm gay. I have a partner and 2 children. Our first child I gave birth to by using an anonymous sperm donor. And our second child we adopted. He came as a foster child as a baby, and then we finally adopted him, which is really how I got into assisted reproduction law. By being a gay lawyer for so many years, I was doing a lot of work in the legal area of family formation, and people started to ask me if I could help them find a surrogate. So about 15 years ago, I started the agency Worldwide Surrogacy. I'm the owner and the founder. We have a full team of people working in Fairfield, Connecticut. Some of us are working remotely now because of COVID, and we also have an office in New York City. Surrogacy is a really amazing way to have a child. It's complicated, so you do need to surround yourself with the right team of professionals, but it's very doable and it's very safe and it's very rewarding, even though at this point in time, if you're thinking of surrogacy, you could probably not even imagine who the woman might be that would actually carry your baby from a tiny embryo through to a newborn that you would be bringing home with you from the hospital. So what good surrogacy agencies do is they take you on and they support you through the entire process, from when you first sign up with them through when you have your baby. And they also, what we do is we recruit and screen women to become surrogates. And that's a crucial piece of surrogacy, is the screening of the women who apply, because if we do that right, both the medical clinics and the agencies and the lawyers do the screening right, then that sets the stage for a very safe and sound and fulfilling surrogacy journey. The benefits, as you can see from the slide, there are a good number of benefits to having a baby through surrogacy, and these are only a few of them that are listed here. But of course, one man of a gay couple can be biologically related to the child. You can also make embryos from both father's sperm and then have a second child with the other father's sperm. So you can have biological children related to both of you if you're in a couple. And of course, we help single men become fathers through surrogacy, and single women and straight couples. So there's no discrimination there from anywhere, from the clinics, from the lawyers, from the surrogates. Then it's a group of people. The beautiful thing about it is that it's a group of people that come together to bring a baby into the world. So it's not like adoption, where you might not meet the birth mother until later on in the process. But with surrogacy, you really team up. The way I like to look at it is it's this group of people, the surrogate, if she's married, her husband, the parents, coming together to bring a baby into the world, and then surrounded by the team of professionals. So that would be me, my team, the medical clinic, and we support and provide the foundation for this group of people to bring a baby into the world. So you'll have bonds. You'll have a bond with your surrogate. You don't have to keep in touch with your surrogate after the baby's born, but many people do, because it's such a personal and intimate type of a relationship that you're having with someone. Egg donor, you may have a bond with your egg donor. It might be an unknown egg donor, anonymous, or it might be someone that you know. So that's also a possible relationship. And then, of course, the way, for me, it's very passionate work. I think of it as family. Like when people join up with me for me to help them have their baby, I feel like you become family with me. So we always love to get the pictures of the babies, not only when they're born, but as they're growing up. I added this provision, no legal risk. Of course, in anything that we do that involves contract, there's always a little bit of legal risk, but in surrogacy, you can really minimize it to very, very tiny risk, because one really important benefit of gestational surrogacy is that you can become the legal parents of your baby before the birth. So therefore, at the time of the birth, as soon as that baby is born, it's your baby. You are recognized as the parents. The hospital gives you the wristband to match the baby, and there's no questions asked that the birth certificate's going to come out with your names, and you're going to be able to take the baby home from the hospital, again, respected and recognized as the legal parents. Yes, there are challenges, as David said, to each one of these processes. There are challenges, and before I forget, I also want to mention how proud I am to be part of Gays with Kids and to be participating now as a founding member in this new launching of Gays with Kids. So thank you, Brian and David, and it's really an honor. And I also appreciate working with people like Trey and the other professionals that are part of it. It's a very collaborative working environment for all of us, and we want to bring a lot of good information to people. It's expensive, gestational surrogacy. In my view, it's the only drawback of surrogacy in the United States. Other things can be really controlled and risk can be minimized, but it is expensive. And yes, I think that this range that you're seeing here of 135 to about 150,000 is where many people land to have their baby through surrogacy. 200,000 would be the very high end. Might mean that there were some hurdles that weren't expected, which don't always happen to people. But yes, the timing is about right. I'd say about a year and a half to 2 years to have a baby through gestational surrogacy. So we're here as resources. You can always reach out to us. You can find my information on the Gays with Kids website, and I'd be happy to be a resource, even if you're not ready to sign up with anyone. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for having me as part of this webinar.
Thank you, Vicki. So that's our, very quick overview of surrogacy, which again is a very complicated process. So in the coming months, we are going to be rolling out specific webinars on how the matching process works with the surrogate, how to find an egg donor if you have a family member or a friend that you're interested in working with in this process, how you can do that, the legal process, and then most importantly, maybe for surrogacy in particular, how you can try to offset some of the costs and afford what is unquestionably a very expensive process. So thank you very much, Vicki. And so next up, we're going to run into, there we go, adoption. They're going to hand it over to Trey, who's going to run us through this.
Hi everyone. Trey Raven here. I am a social worker and I work for AMAR, which is a foster care and adoption agency out in the Seattle area in Washington State. I've been at AMAR for, 9 years now. Have had a couple positions. I've been kind of a frontline worker working directly with our foster and adoptive parents and supporting them in that process during the home study, and then supporting them when kids are in the home. I've done outreach work to kind of recruit foster families. And now I'm kind of doing more grant management, looking at ways we can expand some of our programs in Washington State and do some fun new things. Personally, me and my husband were foster parents for about 4 years. We just closed our license a couple months ago. We had 2 little kiddos during that time. We had a little baby boy for about 3 months. He was about 4 months when he came, and he was about 7 months when he left to go reunify with his parents. And then we had a 2-year-old, 20-month-old came into our house. And then due to the circumstances, he became what's called legally free for adoption. And so we adopted him from the foster care system just about a year ago in June when he was 4. And now he's 5. And I was telling them earlier, he started kindergarten today. So a very exciting day in our house over here. But on this slide, I will talk to you about adoption. Note, I'll talk about foster care next, and so I'll talk about how foster care adoption works on that slide. But for this one, we'll focus on kind of 3 types of adoption here, kind of domestic infant adoption. So that's typically working with an adoption agency to adopt an infant child. We're matched with the birth parents along the process. And I will say, even though my work at AMAR is all in the foster care adoption realm, when I first started at Amara, we were also a domestic adoption agency. And so I had the pleasure of working with 3 different families in the adoption triad to help facilitate that. So I do have some experience with that. The other form is independent adoption. So it's very similar to domestic adoption. The difference is that you're working with an adoption attorney or an adoption facilitator, depending on what state you would live in, what they call it, but you're not working with the agency. And then the other one is international adoption. So that's adopting kids outside of the United States. But benefits of adoption. Obviously, there is creating family and providing a home for a baby who needs one. One thing about the adoption world is we're really moving towards open adoption. That's been really the trend in the last couple decades. And what that means is that you have some relationship with the birth parents post-adoption. Every case is different. It's a negotiation. But I think that's a really cool part about adoption now is you get to have this open adoption and really include the birth parents in some way. And for some that may be, including them as extended family and having them over for birthdays and holidays and all of those types of things that you would celebrate with your other family members, which is really cool. There are some challenges. There is expense to adoption. As you saw on the last slide, is not quite to the cost of surrogacy, but there are costs associated with it. So for domestic infant adoption, about $20,000 to $45,000 a year. Independent adoption in that same realm, as well with international adoption. One thing I did mention, this process is it's birth parent driven. So typically, as part of the home study process, you'll create like a profile book that kind of describes who you are as a family, and then prospective birth parents will read the prospective adopted parents' profiles, and then they pick maybe their top 2 or 3 that they really feel connection with, and then meet with the prospective adoptive families, and then they would choose the adoptive family for the unborn child. And so just knowing that's a birth parent driven process. Every state has different laws, but once the baby's born, birth parents do have some window where they can change their mind and decide to parent. And so that's always something to think about, is you could be matched really early on in the pregnancy. I had one of the cases I worked on, the prospective adoptive parents were at the hospital, and then right when baby was born, mom changed her mind. And so just knowing that is mom's right, dad's right if he's involved. And so that's just part of the process. And then the waiting period. For adoption, for waiting period, it's about 1 to 2 years for domestic infant adoption, for independent adoption as well. International adoption can be a little bit longer sometimes, just because you're dealing with, two countries and laws and all the different policies. So it can sometimes maybe get a little bit more complicated. All right, we'll move on to foster care.
Great. Oop. There we
go.
go.
All right. So foster care. So the goal of the foster care system is to reunify children back with their parents once the state has documented that there's been neglect and or abuse in that child's primary home. And so the state feels like they need to remove that child while the parents hopefully work on rectifying their parental deficiencies to have their children reunified in their care. And so thinking about that in foster care, I think one of the cool things about foster care is it can be temporary if you want it to be. And so, I've talked with a lot of prospective gay dads, and the thoughts of adoption and really committing to a kid for the life of a kid, right? We know kids, we don't stop parenting kids at 18 anymore. And so you're really signing on for a lifelong of supporting that kid can seem really daunting. And so I think one thing about foster care is, it's meant to be temporary until the state says it's not. And so you can sign up to be a short-term placement for a kid. So you can sign on saying, I can care for this kid for 6 months. And the state's like, great, that's the plan to get them back home. And so it allows you to kind of try out parenting and feel like what it's like, but you're not making that forever commitment, but you're also meeting a huge need for that child in your community. Another benefit of foster care is that there's a lot of resources and training attached to it, because it's a state-funded program. They want foster parents to have the skills necessary to parent the children. And so there's a lot of training and resources that you can provided. Some states have like private agencies. And so when you get licensed, you can choose between your state agency or a private agency. And typically with that private agency, you're going to get your own case manager and the kind of extra support throughout the process. And so that's one thing to think about as well. Like I talked about, foster care, kids are being removed because there is some neglect or abuse in the home. And so some of the kids in the foster care system obviously can have heightened behaviors or emotional issues due to that trauma and neglect that they experienced while living with their parents. And so that's part of why there's so much training. We really want to make sure foster parents have the skills to how to be trauma informed to their parenting. But that's something to keep in mind, like what is your level of special needs? We know a lot of the younger children, the infants and the toddlers that come into the foster care system are coming in for substance abuse. And so a lot of the babies may be exposed to various substances and alcohol in utero. And obviously that has effects on the development short and long term. So just making sure you're comfortable with that and learning more about that. And foster care adoption. So how does that work? There are definitely kids in the system. The state has determined after a pertinent amount of time that return home is not a safe option. So they will do a process called terminating parental rights, making that kid legally free, in which case the state now needs to find an adoption home for this child in foster care. And so adoption is also a goal of foster care as well. That typically takes longer, and it kind of depends on your age, how long it'll take. Most of the kids that we see are legally free that need kind of homes, at least locally in my state in Washington, are going to be a little bit older, have a little bit higher needs. So you kind of have to think about that. And, like for me and my husband, we really wanted to foster and adopt an infant or younger kids. We were licensed for under 5. And so we really knew that for that young age, we really had to buy in with family reunification and kind of support that until the state says, hey, this is an option. Will you adopt this kid? And we, of course, said absolutely to that. And so we'll talk more about that later. Quickly, cost. Foster care is pretty low cost to you. Like I said, it's a state-funded program, obviously. And so that covers a lot of the subsidies that you would be paying for in the other forms of adoption. And then timelines. So temporary care, really 3 to 6 months to kind of get you licensed and kind of meet those requirements. And then really you get to decide, for the temporary care, it's finding the placement that fits your home. The state will send out an email saying this kid needs a placement for a month, for 6 months. We're not sure. So you get to say yes, depending on that. And then kind of permanent adoption, 3 to 6 months to get approved, to get licensed. And then it depends if you take a kid who's not legally free yet, that can extend the timeline. But if you were to take placement of a legally free kid where adoption's the kind of the focus from day one, at least in Washington state, they want to see about 6 months of stability in the home, make sure the kids are doing okay, make sure you as adoptive parents are doing okay before we finalize and kind of close the case and the state kind of steps out. And so, that's what the timeline can look like, about 6 to 17 months, depending on where you are in that process.
Awesome. Thank you, Trey. And so I want to just remind everyone that for adoption and foster care, we're going to be rolling out a ton of new webinars and resources too in the coming months. This will cover everything from the costs associated to if you're wanting to do a domestic infant adoption, to the home study process, which tends to incite a lot of fear in people, even though it shouldn't. And so, look out for those. Again, you can go to our website, gazewithkids.com, check us out on Instagram and Facebook. We'll be advertising all these in the weeks ahead. And then one other thing I'll cover just before jumping into our last path is we do have on our new webpage, which I'll drop this into the chat before the end of the webinar. We have a bunch of new resources and videos that are going to be walking through a lot of the topics that you probably have questions on that we're just kind of skimming over here. So I'll encourage you to go to that and check out these brand new videos and resources that we've put together over the last couple of months. Okay, so this last area is what we're calling co-parenting. So it's hard to find a good word for this. And this is a path to parenthood that is my own. So I, about 6 years ago, had two very good friends, a lesbian couple, asked me to become a known sperm donor to them. And I knew very little about the process. And so I, started to look for resources or just anything that could kind of help me understand what that means for me, my legal risk, my ethically, what does that mean to be becoming a known donor to someone? What are my responsibilities there? What does it mean to be a father to someone that I'm not actually raising? And there wasn't a ton out there. So we are very slowly, but getting there to developing the resources for this path to parenthood as well. And so I would say my personal experience over the last 6 years, I now have 3 kids with my friends. It allows for a biological connection to your children. And, as someone that was never really pursuing that, it's been, I have to say, an amazing experience. It's also, it's something that's becoming more common in the LGBTQ community. So lesbian couples working with gay male couples, and single gay man working with a lesbian couple, even single people are starting to find that they don't need to be in a romantic partnership in order to have a child. And it's even becoming more common in the straight community. It's, per usual, the gays are set in the way and showing the straights that they can think a little bit outside of the box and do things a little bit more creatively. So I would say those are the benefits. It's been an amazing experience for me, and I think it can be for a lot of people. It is very complicated, and the world, especially the legal world, is not really caught up to address kind of these new family formations. So, right now in most states, it's not possible to have 3 legal parents, for instance. So even if I was a co-equal parent with my friends, I had to cede that power to them in order to my kids live with the moms, and that's how it should be. But in other instances, that's, there's equal co-parenting happening. And so deciding who's going to be the legal parents of the children can be complicated, and it differs state to state. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're going into this process. And then, parenting with, these were very good friends of mine that I took this plunge with, but, it's still, once you have children with someone, it definitely changes. I'm sure this is true for married couples too, but it changes the relationship and the dynamic. And it's something that requires constant conversation and feedback. So it's also something to be aware of, that this isn't something to do lightly or just with anyone. So there are some interesting resources that have popped up in recent years as this has become a more popular path to parenthood for queer people. There are websites that you can kind of match people that are interested in pursuing this, that maybe have always wanted to become a parent, don't want to do it on their own necessarily, but haven't necessarily fallen into the relationship that would be able to make it possible. And we will be covering a lot of these in resources that are yet to come, and including some of the people involved in those sites, so that you can hear about what that process is like if you don't have someone in your life necessarily that you're interested in doing this with yet. But again, I would just stress that for anyone that you do this with, it's not, my friends and I took 6 months to discuss every last aspect of this and meet with lawyers and talk about, the known donor arrangement and what that would look like, what it means for my family and theirs. So yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be taken seriously and slowly. So one of the benefits of doing it this way is that, if you, if everyone's healthy and you can, get pregnant right away, this is just, a quote unquote normal pregnancy. So it's just basically the cost that of a pregnancy with insurance, which ranges from $6,000 to $9,000. There's also legal fees that you have to consider when you're doing this this approach, and something called a second parent adoption is typically recommended to make sure that those that are meant to be the legal parents are in fact legal parents, and that's an actual adoption process that you heard covered very quickly by Trey. And so a regular pregnancy. So it's if you're doing it this way, there are some because of the legal process and because of the conversations involved that should be involved when you go into this kind of process, the time can really range from it could be quick to several year process like it was for me and my friends. And yeah, so I guess I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure that we have as much time for Q&A for all 4 of these paths as possible. So again, I'm just going to start from the top of the Q&A and we'll kind of head down. So I'm assuming that we'll start with a lot of the questions that people had in Vicky's presentation first. But please do use that function at the bottom, the Q&A function, and we're going to jump into that right now. Cool. So our first one, Trey, is and this might be this might be one that we have to get back to you on, but so it's someone that's from Costa Rica who he and his partner are interested in doing an international adoption, maybe siblings from the United States. So do you know how that, I guess you could probably speak a little bit to the process of just what is happening in the world of international adoption and how easy that is to do or not do in the current political environment.
Yeah, I would say international adoption is where I know the least. I would say I don't believe the United States does international adoptions of our children. If they're abused and neglected or don't, have to live in their primary home with kin, they go into foster care and then we keep them in our United States foster care system. The only time I've heard of a foster kid moving internationally is to be with the parent who was not in the United States, but I don't believe you can adopt a foster child from outside of the United States if you're not a U.S. citizen or living here.
Right. So yeah, I would encourage you, Alan, to if you are a U.S. citizen or not, that might impact the process. Yeah. You can also check with Spence Chapin, which is another one of our founding members that's not on this particular webinar, but they facilitate international adoptions from Colombia, South Africa, and I think Bulgaria. So there are paths available for queer men interested in adopting, but yeah, we'll have to get back to you on the specifics as to how easily that's done when you're not in the United States.
Yeah, and just real quick, I will say not all countries are open to same-sex couples adopting
Also,
naturally.
yeah,
So
absolutely
that's
right.
another thing to look into.
Yeah, so and I guess just a quick note on international adoption there. It is something that there is something called the Hague Convention that was signed like a decade or two ago that has really restricted the ability to adopt internationally. It's actually been a good thing. It's been cutting down on child trafficking, but it has also made the process for adopting internationally much more complicated. So that's something to know if you're looking into this. And then when you are adopting internationally, you're subjected not only to our local domestic rules, but also those of the country that you're adopting from. And most countries do not allow same-sex couples to adopt. One loophole in that is that if you're a single gay man and not married, that they wouldn't necessarily know. And if they allow single people to adopt, that's one path forward for you to do so. Okay, great. So next, so this is for you, Vicky. When you say you can be recognized by the legal parents before the birth, what are the variables, and does that depend on the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. State law is important in gestational surrogacy. Every state has a different process or legal procedure by which it establishes the parents to be the legal parents of the baby. But most states are states where we talk about a pre-birth order. So I think right now there are only 2 states where you cannot do surrogacy, compensated surrogacy. So that might be Michigan and Louisiana. And then there are a few states that do a post-birth proceeding, but it's really very seamless. It's right before the birth and then directly after the birth. Florida is such a state, and I think maybe Vermont and Virginia. But all the other states, practically all the other states, have what we call a pre-birth order process. And that would mean that the legal process is done before the birth, so that you have a document, a court document, a judgment, or at least the papers that are necessary to establish you as the parent. Like, for example, Illinois doesn't have a court process, but they have affidavits that you do before the birth. And so the state is on notice to process the birth certificate with the intended parents before the birth. I mean, the birth certificate comes after the birth, but the process happens before the birth. So it's very safe legally that way. And yes, it is a function of state law, but there are very many states where we can do this pre-birth order. Only in gestational surrogacy. I see another question that has to do with how often is the egg donor and the carrier the same woman? Not very often anymore. In the past, before we had a lot of advancements in medical technology, we had what we call traditional surrogacy, and that is a process where the woman who is the surrogate is carrying her own baby. So the baby comes from her own eggs, to address that question. But in that scenario, you cannot get a pre-birth order. In traditional surrogacy, it is more analogous to an adoption because the woman is giving birth to her own genetic biological baby. So she has to actually give that baby up for adoption after the birth, and thereby the intended parents will, the sperm contributor will be the legal father, genetic father, but the co-parent will have to do this co-parent adoption process that we've been talking about. And the carrier, the surrogate, has to give up her legal rights after the birth.
Great, fantastic. So this next one is also on surrogacy, which the question is, I'm interested in pursuing surrogacy, but really have no clue what the first step is, which is a great question. So I will first say you're doing the first step by being on this webinar and learning kind of like the broad overview of the process. And again, going to our website, gayswithkids.com, and you can do a ton of research and dig into resources there. But otherwise, Vicky, what would you say is the first step?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, David. This person is taking the first step by coming to this webinar and starting to gather information. And a next practical step might be to actually have consultations with professionals. So that could be someone who runs a surrogacy agency like me, or another surrogacy agency. There are other good professionals to talk to, and also doctors. Have not your regular doctor, but a reproductive physician, and you'll find those resources on the Gays with Kids resources site too. So pick a doctor or 2 or 3 doctors and have initial consultations. They'll do them, I'm sure most of them do them complimentary, maybe a half-hour consultation. So start to gather your information. What is the process? What does it mean to make embryos? Where do I get an egg donor? How do I become the parent? Who is my surrogate going to be? So outline the questions and start to get the answers through these consultations.
And I will just add to that quickly, and this goes for adoption and all these paths to parenthood actually, which is that there are a lot of options out there for fertility clinics and surrogacy agencies, adoption agencies, which is fantastic, but they're not all created equal, and nor are they all very experienced in working with LGBTQ people. So it is very important to when you're looking for your professionals, to be working with people that have a long track record with our community, that know the specific issues that we face, and that will be affirming of who we are and our right to be parents. And this is again why we're trying to concentrate all these resources on our new website. So if you do have questions about specific agencies that you're interested in, this goes for adoption or for surrogacy, you can email us at dads@gayswithkids.com, or just go to our website and you can learn more about that. Okay, great. So next is on adoption. So the question is, I'm assuming that adoption processes are different based on the state, which is true. So the question is it better to go through, I guess, a state-based organization or a national organization? And who are the most reliable organizations to work with? So this is kind of touching on what I just said, Trey, but if you want to clarify that, that'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely varying in laws state by state, but they're not like, most of the time they're not drastically different. They're just like maybe difference in timelines or different little things like that. And I would say, I would echo what David said. I think find an agency that's LGBTQ friendly. I think that's more important than whether it's national or state, and then kind of looking at kind of the work they do. If you are looking at domestic infant adoption, if you go with one that works across multiple states, then you potentially have a bigger pool of birth parents looking at your profile. So that may be a plus if you go on a national organization or one that covers multiple states and regions. So yeah, that's something to think about too when you're thinking about agencies.
Great. And I'll add to that with adoption in particular, it's important to know that, first of all, it is legal to adopt as a gay person in every state in the country, and that there is at least one resource for you to be able to do so. We've had a kind of a backlash since that became legal after the legalization of same-sex marriage, where some states are now passing laws that make it legal for state-based or state-funded organizations to discriminate against gay people that want to adopt or serve as foster parents. So it's very important, especially with adoption, to make sure that you are finding an agency that's going to, again, not only work with you, but be very affirming of the process. Okay, fantastic. So the next is also on adoption. So is there a percentage of children in foster care that are adopted? Trey, and I guess if you want to just talk, you can elucidate that a little bit more as well, that process.
Yeah, so I will give you my state's numbers, and I think they'd probably be pretty applicable to other states. So in Washington State, when we look at how kids exit foster care, 60% return home. So go back to parents. 16% are adopted. And then the other 5%, I'm not good at math, are kids who turn 18 or 21, depending on that state's age limit, where they age out of the foster care system, or they go into guardianship, which is typically reserved for relatives who are going to take kind of long-term, it's kind of like adoption, but it's not quite for relatives, or they get into like another like long-term permanent setting. So say it's like a kid with really high medical needs and they can't be adopted because anyways, we're getting down the weeds, but I think about 16% are adopted. So that's kind of the general, so about, a little over half are going home. And that, like I talked about earlier, it's also thinking about the age, right? So legally free kids are in the system, but they're going to be typically a little bit older, a little bit more special needs. If you're looking at the younger, especially like infants, obviously if you're going to get an infant, that's going to be that kid's first time into foster care. And so the state's going to want to assess their parents' ability to get their children placed back. And In our state, that's about 12 to 16 months or so. So that just is before the state they can decide. So just thinking about, you could parent an infant for a year and a half. The state says, they're going to go back home, and then you're kind of restarting that process again. So that can also push out timelines.
Great. Yeah. So I guess this would be important to look a little bit closer at your particular state, because it might differ. I think the national percentage is something like 27%, around there, of children in foster care have been what Trey was calling legally freed for adoption, means that they can be adopted. The other percentage are people that are children that are trying to be reunited with the biological family, again, because that's the primary goal of foster care. Okay, great. So this next one is about international surrogacy. Vicki, if you know much about what the altruistic surrogacy laws are in Canada, and I guess you could just speak to this internationally as well, because, I'll just let you take that if you know.
Sure. Well, Canada does have permissible altruistic surrogacy. They're not in favor of compensated surrogacy, although it's done there in a way that where they categorize the payments to the surrogate as living expenses, and they have to be within certain ranges. But the other thing is, in Canada, I don't believe you can advertise for a surrogate, so it has to be word of mouth. Maybe a relative or a friend becomes your surrogate. And there are very good lawyers in Canada that can address this. And if you needed a consultation with a lawyer in Canada, I could certainly give you some resources if you wanted to reach out to me later.
Great. And so I guess it's worth noting here that this is surrogacy in the United States is really the most robust country on earth where it's practiced. And it is much less practiced internationally. So, this is, again, the experts we have here are people that have been doing it the longest, and that goes internationally as well.
Yeah, let me jump on that for a second. The U.S. really is the best place to have a baby through surrogacy because it's the least legal risk and the best medical technology and the best ethics, the ethical procedures around surrogacy in the U.S. And by legal safety, I mean, like, we do have laws where people can become parents, and even people from out of the country are able to safely return home with their babies with the U.S. passport, whereas many people who go to other countries to have babies through surrogacy often run into legal problems because the laws change or the laws don't favor them leaving the country with their baby. So it's quite precarious to try to go outside of the U.S. to have a baby through surrogacy.
Great. And so this one also touches on international issues with regards to surrogacy. So John says that he has a sister who's offered to donate an egg, but she lives in Australia. So is international egg donation possible? And I guess, how does that work if so?
It's possible, for sure. But the place where you're going to get the most clear answers are from a reproductive doctor in the US, because there are guidelines that the clinics in Australia would have to follow in order to be able to transport those eggs into the US or make embryos and transport the embryos. So there are good resources on Gays with Kids website for reproductive physicians who can easily give you some guidance regarding that question.
Yeah, John. So again, if you just want to email us at dads@gayswithkids.com, we can direct you to one of the doctors on our team that can give you a more complete answer to that question. Okay. So we did altruistic surrogacy. So is fostering laws, are they, okay, so this question is about whether fostering laws are come from the state or federal or local county level. Trey, if you can kind of go over that a little bit.
Yeah, so the federal government sets the minimum kind of foster standards for all states, and all the states have to kind of meet the federal standards. But then states and local authorities have the right to add to that, right? So they can have extra requirements or kind of add to that, but they have to have kind of the basis of what kind of the feds have said they want in foster care. The feds actually just did that earlier this year. So you can look that up federally, and then also your public fostering laws are going to be very publicly as well. And just know some states like Washington were state-based, and some states like California are county-based foster programs. So all a little bit different, but yeah, feds set the basis, and then states and counties can add whatever they want in the state as long as it adds to it, doesn't take away, if that makes sense.
Great. If that did not answer your question, if you have more specific questions around laws in your county or state or wherever you are, again, feel free to email us and we can get you some more information there. Okay, so Manuel wants to know about the programs available to do surrogacy. Vicki, if you can talk just a little bit about the lay of the land there.
Yeah, so to Manuel's question, gestational surrogacy is a path to parenthood. We know that we're describing it. David, you made a really good point about finding resources that are friendly to the LGBTQ community and making sure that you have trusted expert professionals helping you through the process. So what I like to see as a model for surrogacy is that the parents choose two entities: one, their surrogacy agency, and two, reproductive clinic. And there are programs available, surrogacy agency programs and reproductive physician programs that you can choose from. There are many, but again, you want to narrow it down to the agencies and the clinics that will help you the best, that are the most successful, that are the most reputable, and where you'll have the most confidence in achieving your dream of having a baby. So you have to get references, and a good place to start is Gays with Kids, because they are really vetting the providers that they're putting on their site, and that would be a good place to start. Then word of mouth. You might have friends who have had successful processes in having children, so you ask them who they used. But you do have to be careful, because there are people that just hang out a shingle and say, hey, I'm a surrogacy agency, and maybe they know what they're doing, but maybe they don't. So you want an entity with a team of people that's going to help you with case management and screening the surrogate, and reputable physicians.
Great. Okay, so this is a great question. So this applies to all the different paths that we've covered today. So Matt says that legal concerns seem like a big consideration for all of these paths, which is true. So if you both can just talk it to, he's curious if the first step should be to speak with a lawyer about the laws in your particular state that govern these processes. So Vicki, you want to start, and we'll go to adoption.
Sure. Yes, definitely. You want to have legal advice. You can talk to a surrogacy agency that has a lawyer on board. So mine, there are a few others, Circle Surrogacy, and you can find legal advice within the surrogacy agency. Or there are very, very good lawyers. You can look at different organizations like the American Academy of Assisted Reproduction and Adoption Lawyers. You can go on their website. There's a directory of lawyers in every state that you can talk to, or the Family Law Group of the American Bar Association. You can check that group out for lawyers. You need a lawyer who specializes in assisted reproduction law or adoption.
Great. Trey, you want to take that for adoption?
Are we answering that Matt question about, is it just different between single and married? Is that the one we're answering?
No, so this is about whether the first step should be to seek out the expertise of a lawyer when you're about to adopt or do foster care.
Got it. For foster care, I mean, I guess do whatever feels comfortable to you to make the informed decision. I don't know if a lawyer is going to help you so much with the foster care route, because the adoption is so far down the line for foster care. But definitely, and I see the question too about the difference between independent adoption and agency. So when you work with an adoption agency, typically it's more of a kind of a one-stop shop. So you go in, they have a social worker that writes your home study. They also have folks who are working with the birth families who potentially want to place their kid for adoption. And that agency also has their own lawyer, or they contract with a lawyer who kind of does all the legal work to make sure everything's, fine with the paperwork, so that when you adopt, you're all good. So that's kind of an agency. Independent adoption services may just be an attorney who does adoption work. And so you meet just with the attorney, and then you contract out to get your home study done by a social worker. And then that lawyer maybe then has their paralegal kind of do birth family recruitment around trying to find birth families. So it's a little bit more, parsed out. So it just really depends on kind of your family and kind of what your preference is. The end goal will still be the adopted child. It's just kind of a one-stop shop versus kind of having different folks working with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, I think for all of the paths to parenthood, the agencies that are involved in helping guide you through this process will have the expertise needed to talk about the legal issues in the state that you live in. So you obviously seeking legal advice is always a good idea, but I think for these, for the agencies that we're talking about, they will have the answers to that as well. And I will say on the independent adoption versus agency adoption, we do have a webinar that's going to cover the differences between those and some of the advantages or disadvantages of each path. So you can look out for that in the coming weeks. Okay, great. So Sean wants to know, I'm curious if aspects will be covered in relation to non-US citizens living in the US looking to become parents. Okay, so this would be very different depending on the path you're looking at. But Vicki, why don't you take that? Because I think it's a little bit more straightforward there.
Right. For gestational surrogacy, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you can become a parent through surrogacy in the U.S. We have many international parents. That's why we named our agency Worldwide. We have many parents from Europe, some from Asia, South America. So we have many parents in the U.S. who are green card holders and having their children through surrogacy. So that's not an issue.
Great. Trey, you want to answer that as best you can for adoption?
Yeah, same for adoption and foster care as well. I can say, we have a huge tech industry out where I live. So we have a lot of folks here on work visas, working at Microsoft, Nintendo, all those places. And I've had tons of international families foster and adopt with us. So yeah, citizenship status is not an issue. And for foster care, at least in our state, we don't even check immigration status. So yeah.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so this is a great question. So Matt wants to know how these processes differ if you are a single gay man trying to pursue surrogacy or adoption. So why don't we just start with you, Vicki?
Yeah, we help many single parents, single men and single women, to become parents through surrogacy. So that is totally not an issue. The only issue is just thinking about doing it on your own and making sure you have a support system for yourself so that you can enjoy it with someone. It's nice to share when you're pregnant that you're telling your family or your friends that you're pregnant. And but there's no issue with being a single parent.
Great. And for adoption, do you want to talk about that process?
Yep, same with foster care and adoption, just kind of similar things for us. We just talk with single families to make sure they have the support system since there's not that other parent to rely on. And then, well, this goes back to what David said, is going back to the whole religious freedom laws. Because of that, some states agencies can deny based on same-sex, but also based on marital status. So if you're not married, they can say, but just finding the right agency that will support and has worked with single families before. It's important.
And I'll just add that, I mean, on Gays with Kids, after 6 years of profiling, tons of gay, bi, and trans dads on our site, we've profiled many queer men who are single and who have pursued each of these paths very successfully and happily. So I would encourage you to go look on the site. We have a whole section dedicated to single dads, so you can read a little bit about and be inspired by dads that have done it on their own. And we also have a very active Facebook group on our Gays with Kids Facebook page that's dedicated to single men who are dads or hope to become dads. So check that out as well. Great. So okay. So how would surrogacy costs differ if you were abroad, Vicki? I think that's what this question's asking.
If you were coming from abroad into the U.S., if that's the question, then there wouldn't be very much difference. There would be just the personal differences, like more travel costs for you to come to the States for your visits with clinics or to have your baby. There could be some legal work in your home country. I think we always recommend that an international parent has a home country lawyer to help with the immigration issues to make sure that your baby can be established as a citizen in your home country.
Great. So I guess why don't we answer the other question, which they may also be asking, which is if you are in the U.S. and interested in pursuing surrogacy abroad, what do the costs look like there?
So I don't have a lot of detailed information about that. What I know is that the cost could be less than the cost of surrogacy in the U.S., but what I also know is that the risks could be greater.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one thing, like Vicki was saying earlier, one of the, especially on the ethical front of surrogacy abroad, is here in the U.S. we have strict standards and regulations about how surrogates are treated and compensated, and you just have less control over that in countries abroad that are that also have surrogacy programs, and very few even do allow it legally. So that's something to consider. Okay, so for European parents, would the legal support from the agency be included in the European country as well? So I assume this is talking about surrogacy. So I guess maybe this is talking about, like, so if you are working with a U.S.-based agency, would you also be working with a U.S.-based fertility clinic, or is there any part of the process that you would do in your own country?
From my point of view, in my program, the only process that might be done in a home country would be sperm analysis, possibly an egg donor that could be related to you that you would then bring to the U.S. or transport the eggs to the U.S. Some people have embryos that they made abroad, and they can be transported to the U.S. if they were made under the right FDA guidelines. But mainly the model that we all subscribe to for the most part is that everything's done in the U.S., that the embryos are made in the U.S., the surrogate is in the U.S. In terms of home country work and law, there should be a home country lawyer, and we get to know what needs to be done for bringing your baby back to the home country from that lawyer. And so just taking an example of the UK, like we've done so many couples from the UK, we know what they need to go back to the UK and do their application for parental order. So we send our UK clients back with all the package of documents they need to make that application. So I think we just have to look at everyone's particular circumstances and help them that way.
Okay, so this is another good one. We kind of covered this for surrogacy, but so someone's considering adoption. They're curious what to know the first steps should be. Is it to go to our website, check in with local community centers, or what would you recommend as the first step, Trey?
Yeah, definitely look locally. Look at Gays with Kids website, and they have a link there. But Human Rights Campaign, All Children, All Families, has a list of kind of LGBTQ affirming agencies across the country. So that's a good place to look. Yeah, definitely reach out to your local LGBTQ center and see who they have heard families working with. But I think the biggest one is speak with gay families who have created families in your area and see who they use and kind of get that kind of firsthand experience. I think that's the best way to really get a sense, like, yeah, they're LGBTQ affirming on their website, but like, how are they in that one-on-one interaction? So yeah, I think you're on the right track there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll just reiterate there that if you haven't noticed, Gays with Kids is trying to be the kind of a one-stop shop for all of these questions that you have and all your needs. Again, we're rolling out the resources as we are creating them. If there are resources that you are suggesting we have that we don't have, we would love to hear that so we can make sure that we do have them. But in this instance, after going to our website and doing some research, a very good first step is to go to the Human Rights Campaign's website, which we work very closely with because they have done an incredible job vetting agencies based on their commitment to diversity and to the LGBTQ community. So we only have 3 minutes left. I'm going to try to get a couple more in. And actually, so I'm going to jump to this one because I think it will have a better explanation for it. So Trevor wants to know if adopting a healthy domestic infant is a realistic expectation. So they've heard stories of healthy infant adoption for years, but never getting a baby. So so I guess a failed match. How can you increase your chance of success and reduce the timeline?
Yeah, so when I was doing that work, and I know locally the average wait time once you're approved, so that your approval time is about 3 to 6 months for the home study process, is about 2 years locally to get matched with a birth parent and babies. So I know the wait time can be long, so I think it's a realistic expectation as long as you're willing to wait about 2 to 3 years potentially if you include the time to get approved. As far as increasing your chances, you really just have to be yourself in this process. You create that profile book to talk about who you are, and birth parents are picking you because of who you are, and so you just have to be your authentic self. And I know that's hard because you want to increase your chances, but you want them to pick you for who you are, and there's no set thing. Some birth parents are obviously looking for stability and financial stability and all that. I've had some where they picked them because they like their favorite colors are both blue, or they both were Catholic. Like, it really just, you can never pick what the birth parent's going to choose. And so I always tell families, relax, be yourself, and that's the best way to really present yourself and be chosen.
Yeah, it really does seem with adoption in particular that the waiting period, it can really differ case to case. And, but from what I've heard from professionals, it really is that it will happen if you can be patient and stick with the process. But, every wait period is going to be different case to case. Okay, so we only have a minute left. I am so sorry that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. We have a ton of really great ones that we weren't able to touch on. So I will say 2 things. You can, again, just email us at dads@gayswithkids.com, and we will try to get you responses via email. And again, we have tons more webinars coming up. We're going to be doing these weekly, and the rest of these from here on out are going to be very specific. So we'll talk about the cost of surrogacy and how you can afford it, the cost of adoption and how you can afford it, what it's like to be matched with a surrogate, what it's like to be matched with a birth parent. So we're going to get into some nitty gritty. So if you have very specific questions around those topics, they are coming. We will be sending this calendar of webinars out via email. And again, please do follow us on Instagram at Gays with Kids. We will be, as they happen, we'll be promoting them there and on our website and on Facebook. And so I can't thank you enough. This was our first webinar and what's going to be an ongoing series. So thank you so much for all being here. And we look forward to seeing you again. I can't thank Vicki and Trey enough. If you guys want to just say a quick closing out, that would be great. Vicki, go ahead.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Gays with Kids. And Trey, it was a pleasure to be with you. And thanks, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet you. Thanks, Gays with Kids, for having me. And like I said, my information is also on the website. If people have fostering questions, I can definitely get you connected with folks in your state. So
perfect. Yes. And so if you have specific questions for any three of us, please do look us up on our website because we have easy access to all of these people. I should also mention that our webinar series is free. We really want to be getting this information to people free of cost, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, thank you all again, and hopefully we'll see you in a future webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.